So this is a rare early morning live stream, and today I just want to give you a little bit of an update on the coronavirus casualties and talk a little bit about the reaction among governors and local officials and the connection is unstable. Okay. Might have been interrupted a little bit. If anyone's watching, they can tell me in the chat. But just to continue, they revised the number of deaths upward in New York to over 10,000. It was around 7,000, but they're counting all of the people. They're counting an increase in deaths for this week in April or this past week, and attributing these deaths to coronavirus because ostensibly these were people who couldn't be treated because of the fact that so many hospitals are over capacity. Oh, thanks, Sam. That's good to know. Yeah, it cut out for about 6 or 7 seconds, at least on my end. I'm not sure what it was like on your end. So they're attributing the increase in deaths over this past week to the coronavirus, essentially, because these are people who would have been treated more expeditiously, and according to them, survived, but they died because they couldn't access hospitals. At least that's the reasoning they're using. To me, it seems like a faulty methodology, to be honest. A lot of the people whose deaths are attributed to corona had really bad comorbidities. So John Prine was one of the, and there have been a few really famous musicians and artists who died recently ostensibly because of corona. But he also had neck cancer and throat cancer that he had recovered from. And it's very likely that he could have died. He could have died during a limited lung capacity to begin with, and he contracted a version of a novel strain of this virus. That certainly didn't help him. But I think a lot of people are kind of, or at least I've seen a lot of people who are irritated by the fact that they're trying to increase the number of deaths attributed to coronavirus. And whatever the motivations, even if it's done from a supposedly good-hearted motivation, it really is wrong to try to mislead people in order to whip them into a frenzy. And the book I was referring to over the past few weeks, The Great Influenza, had that great quote, which I read. One of Wilson's advisors, who was also a very influential, and that it didn't really matter whether you lied, as long as you lied on behalf of something noble. And I think a lot of people, particularly in the press, bureaucrats and politicians, are taking that saying to heart, and they're really just willfully misleading people, distorting the facts, trying to manipulate public opinion, which is what they're in the business of on at ordinary times, they're they see this crisis as a way to they, they see the ability to exploit this crisis as a way to accrue power and to advance their own goals. And you see this throughout the country and among primarily the press, but also politicians, governors have just exercised an obscene amount of authority, which much of which they're not entitled to. And you can see this in Ohio, in with Governor DeWine, with Governor Jay Inslee in Washington, Governor Gavin Newsom, and of course, Governor Andrew Cuomo kind of used this to position himself as a national leader, if not for this presidential election, which Joe Biden has already ruled out selecting a male running mate. So, so Cuomo can at least position himself to run. Should Joe Biden lose, he could position himself to run in, or even if he wins, he could position himself to run in the future. Despite the fact that he's presided over disastrous policy and has been the nominal leader of a state that has 40% of the deaths, the coronavirus deaths in the United States. Hi, Miss Piggy. And Mark Levin had an interesting broadcast the other day, and he rattled off the approval ratings of all of these governors in order to illustrate how dangerous it is and how much a majority of the American public crave, basically, for lack of a better term, fascism. And you can see this reflected in the approval ratings if you subscribe to the idea that these polls are accurate. And I'd say as a snapshot, they're not too. I would say as a snapshot, they're not that bad. But if you look at some of the things, like for example, Gretchen Whitmer, who is trying to reenact the Holodomor. I mean, she's banned travel. She's banned selling seeds. So basically, you cannot grow your own food at a time when the supply chain has been interrupted, where you have the coronavirus actually shutting down meat processing plants, where hypothetically there might be food shortages should this continue, this economic, this government imposed recession and depression continue. You would have a lack of access to food, and she's ensuring that people will not be able to grow their own food. She's banning seeds, the sale of seeds, and there's no constitutional authority for this or for any of these other decisions, particularly the ones restricting public protests. They're essentially gutting the Bill of Rights, and there's no recourse because even the courts in some instances, for example, the Kansas Supreme Court has banned religious gatherings, so people can't even go to church in Kansas. In North Carolina, even in North Carolina, they're arresting people who are publicly assembling to protest. There was a group that held a small demonstration, 10 or 11 people. Hi, Miss Bluebird. Good morning. It was a small demonstration to argue and fight, and the police arrested them. And if you watch the video, it's really disturbing. They actually tell the protesters that they can suspend their rights basically because it's an emergency, which is not how it works constitutionally. Your rights are not held in abeyance because there's a virus or because there's an infectious disease. And it's also hypocritical when you actually look at this. they're sending out police officers to arrest people for praying in front of abortion clinics, for publicly demonstrating, for going to church, and they're sending out police officers with no protective equipment, grabbing people. They're actually spreading the virus among people who are practicing, who are taking prophylactic measures to prevent contracting this virus. Hi, hi, Liza. Um, they're actually spreading the virus at the same time that they're releasing criminals. And I was actually looking at some of the tweets from, I think this was the Border Patrol Council, but there was a series of tweets describing the people, some of the felons who are being released from prison in order to supposedly um, restrain the outbreak of COVID-19. And these were sex offenders, people who had molested children, people who had been convicted of aggravated assault, rape. These are dangers to the community, and they're being released out into the community, whereas law-abiding citizens are being quarantined forcibly by the government. They're being told that they can't leave their homes, and if they do leave their homes, they'll be arrested for exercising basic constitutional rights. And this is just to point out that the rationale being used to do these things, it's not public safety. When you think of it, it's hard to think of a time where the government actually protected people's lives. If you could, I mean, I would love to debate someone at this point where they can show me where the government has actually protected life rather than just confiscated property, confiscated wealth, and killed people. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that they're very adept at that, but not a lot of evidence that they're good at protecting lives or ending epidemic. I mean, the Spanish flu, the outbreak of the Spanish flu, which occurred in these 3 cycles, and the deadliest was the recurrence after the first time it cropped up, or the second time it cropped up after going away during the summer. And it wasn't government initiatives that restrained the flu or that ended that pandemic. And it's not government decisions that will hasten the will accelerate the decline here. I mean, in New York, there were under 700 deaths, I think, for the first time in the week. But again, this had nothing to do with government decisions. In fact, Richard Carranza, the schools chancellor, and Mayor de Blasio actually probably killed or responsible for the deaths of dozens of public school teachers based on the fact that they kept the school off and they denied and lied about the dangers they faced. And other decisions by public officials, and I've talked about this in the past, the decision by Mark Levin, who's ironically the chairman of the Public Health Committee, to encourage people to go to the Chinese New Year parade. Public officials and the government, the people that are being venerated, have actually increased the likelihood of death. And the Mark Levin show, his point on that was fascinating. The fact that in spite of all this, their approval ratings have gone up. I think Gretchen Whitmer her approval rating has increased, I think, to 70% or 75%, or maybe even higher. Jay Inslee's has increased, and the few governors that have not given in to this hysteria, like Ron DeSantis, who's actually done pretty well given the constraints he's under. His approval rating, I think, has declined by 7 or 8 points, and it is kind of disturbing what this says about the American electorate. But not too surprising. But anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about that today. For those of you who woke up early and saw this, just want to thank you. Sometime later this week, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about this. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And like I said in previous videos, if you want to, if you feel inclined, feel free to share this with your friends or people maybe who are outside of New York who would like to see what's going on.